The city never slept, but it didn't welcome everyone either. Its neon lights flickered like dying fireflies, casting uneven shadows across cracked sidewalks and overflowing gutters. In those shadows moved a figure, hunched and careful, her steps barely making a sound. People passed without noticing, heads down, absorbed in their own lives, their screens, their noise. She was a ghost in the crowd, a dragon woman who had once roamed free and proud, now reduced to scavenging scraps in the alleyways of a world that had no room for her kind. Her scales, once gleaming like polished bronze in the sun, were dulled and scarred. Her wings, folded tightly against her back, were ragged at the edges, useless for flight and cumbersome for hiding. She tugged her worn jacket tighter around herself, trying to ward off the cold that seeped not just into her bones, but into her spirit. Her stomach growled, a hollow, painful reminder that she had eaten nothing in 2 days. "I'm not worth much," she muttered under her breath, her voice low and rough from hunger and neglect. "But I can cook." The words felt almost absurd to her, whispered to the empty night as if saying them aloud could make them true. Yet they were the only thing she had left. A fragment of pride, a sliver of identity in a world that had stripped everything else away. Cooking had once been her joy, a skill she wielded with finesse, a way to nurture and create, to turn simple ingredients into magic. Now, it was merely survival, and a desperate hope that someone might care enough to taste what she could make. She slipped into a narrow alley, the kind the city's high-rises cast in permanent shadow. The alley reeked of damp concrete and rot, but it was quieter than the streets, a place where she could rest without being harassed or ignored entirely. She knelt by a small, cracked barrel she used as a makeshift stove, pulling from her bag a few odd scraps, a wilted piece of bread, a handful of dried herbs, a small portion of salted meat she had managed to find. Her hands worked quickly, almost automatically, combining what little she had with the precision of someone who had spent years mastering her craft. Every sound in the alley made her flinch, the distant screech of brakes, the clatter of a tin can rolling down the street, the echo of footsteps. She had learned long ago that in the city, silence was a weapon, and attention could be dangerous. Her sharp ears twitched as she stirred her meager concoction, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest that had been gnawing at her for far too long. A rat scuttled nearby, its eyes glinting like tiny embers. She shooed it away, not out of fear, but because even the smallest thief in the alley reminded her how fragile her existence had become. This was her life now, shadows, scraps, and whispered hopes that perhaps one day, someone, would notice. From the end of the alley, a shadow fell across her makeshift stove. She froze, heart hammering, wings tensing instinctively. Strangers rarely entered this alley without reason, and those who did usually brought trouble. Her claws flexed, ready to defend herself, but the figure didn't step closer. Instead, it lingered at the edge, silent, watching. She peered into the darkness. The stranger was human, tall, solidly built, and carried an air of quiet authority. A veteran, perhaps, someone whose life had hardened him against the world. Her instincts screamed to flee, yet a flicker of curiosity rooted her in place. He had not spoken, not yet, but his gaze, calm, steady, assessing, was different from the predatory look she had grown accustomed to. I can cook," she said finally, louder than before, her voice trembling but carrying a strange note of defiance. "It's all I have. Maybe someone might taste what I make." The words hung in the alley like smoke, twisting around the shadows. For the first time in days, she felt the weight of eyes on her, not hungry, not cruel, but curious. The veteran's presence was unexpected, and yet it sparked a small, fragile warmth inside her. She returned to her stove, stirring the scraps with care, feeling the heat against her scales. The aroma was faint but comforting, a small rebellion against the bitterness of the streets. As the night deepened, the dragon woman worked in silence, a single thought repeating in her mind, "I'm not worth much, but maybe, just maybe, this is enough to matter." And in the darkness at the edge of the alley, the veteran remained, silently watching, waiting. The veteran stood at the edge of the alley, his boots silent on the wet pavement, as if the city itself had granted him permission to move unnoticed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a posture that spoke of years spent under fire and hardship. His face, weathered and lined, carried the kind of calm only experience could forge, eyes sharp, scanning everything, yet patient, deliberate. For a long moment, he didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply watched the dragon woman, her silhouette bent over the makeshift stove, her movements careful, almost reverent. There was something in her posture that struck him, a quiet dignity in the midst of despair, a stubborn insistence on holding onto a shred of herself when the world had stripped nearly everything else away. She hadn't noticed him at first. Her focus was absolute, her hands shaking slightly as she tended to the small scraps she'd managed to gather. Her wings twitched occasionally, a nervous habit from years of alertness, and the dim light caught on the scales along her arms and neck, dull but still beautiful, like tarnished bronze. Finally, she sensed a presence. Her ears twitched, her claws flexed, and she spun, eyes wide, to face the stranger. The alley felt smaller suddenly, the shadows deeper, the night colder. Her first instinct was to flee, to vanish into the darkness before he could even speak. But something in his eyes made her pause. The veteran didn't step closer. Instead, he raised a hand slightly, a gesture neither threatening nor particularly kind, simply neutral, measured. "You're cooking," he said, his voice calm, gravelly, carrying the weight of experience. "On the streets." She blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. His tone wasn't mocking or accusatory. There was no ridicule, no condescension, only acknowledgement. And in that acknowledgement, she felt an odd mixture of relief and wariness. "Yes," she replied softly, gripping her wooden stirring stick a little tighter. I can't offer much else. I'm not worth much. But I can cook. Maybe someone might." Her voice trailed off, lost in the cold air. He nodded slowly, as if he understood far more than she had said aloud. The veteran had seen desperation before, had seen people reduced to shadows of themselves by a world that didn't care. Yet there was something in her, not fear, not weakness, but a glimmer of pride, fragile yet unbroken. It piqued his interest. "Let me see," he said finally, stepping a fraction closer, careful not to startle her. "Let me see what you've got." Her heart skipped a beat. The words were simple, but in the empty, harsh streets, they were revolutionary. No one had asked to see her cooking in a long, long time. No one had spoken to her like she mattered. Not in years. She swallowed hard, a mixture of fear and hope battling inside her chest. Okay, she whispered, turning back to her small, cracked barrel. She worked quickly, stirring the scraps with precision and care, her hands steady despite the pounding of her heart. The aroma began to rise, faint but rich, carrying notes of spices she had scavenged and meat she had preserved the best she could. Smoke curled upward, ghost-like in the alley's shadows. The veteran leaned against the brick wall, his arms crossed, eyes never leaving her movements. He didn't offer advice, didn't critique, didn't judge. He simply observed. And in that observation, she felt a strange pressure lift, a weight she hadn't realized had settled over her shoulders. Minutes passed. The city around them continued its endless hum of chaos and indifference, but in that alley, time seemed suspended. The dragon woman plated the small meal, placing it carefully on a piece of scrap cardboard she had cleaned as best she could. Her hands trembled slightly as she set it down before him. He studied it for a long moment, then picked up a bite, letting the flavor linger on his tongue. The veteran's expression didn't change at first. He chewed slowly, deliberately, as if savoring not just the food, but the act behind it. Finally, he looked up, meeting her eyes. And in that look, so brief, so subtle, she felt the first spark of something she hadn't felt in years. Recognition. Respect. A hint of hope. "You've got skill," he said simply. "Real skill." Her chest tightened. Skill? That's all? And yet, those words carried more weight than any grand compliment could have. In a world that had ignored her, dismissed her, and abandoned her, one acknowledgement from a stranger, someone who had survived battles she could barely imagine, felt like sunlight breaking through endless storm clouds. She nodded, almost unable to speak. Thank you," she whispered. He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he leaned back, eyes still on her, silent but present. And in that silence, a fragile understanding began to form. In that alley, between scraps and shadows, two broken souls, one human, one dragon woman, stood at the edge of something neither of them could yet name. The night deepened, the city's neon glow flickering over them, and for the first time in a long time, the dragon woman felt the possibility that maybe, she wasn't completely invisible after all. The dragon woman's hands hovered over the small meal, the warmth from the stove brushing against her palms, yet her chest felt frozen. She had offered what little she had, her cooking, and now the veteran was waiting. Waiting silently, like a judge, but without judgment. The alley seemed impossibly quiet, even the city's usual hum had dimmed, as though it, too, had paused to witness this fragile moment. Her wings twitched nervously. She had done this countless times before, in kitchens and homes that welcomed her talent, but never here, never on the streets, never with someone who could look at her and see not the dragon woman scavenging scraps, but the person she still was beneath the grime and tattered clothes. I don't have much, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Just this. Her claws shook slightly as she gestured toward the cardboard plate before him. It's not much. But it's all I can give. The veteran's gaze softened, though it remained steady. He didn't move forward or back. He simply observed, as though measuring not only the food but her courage in offering it. The dragon woman felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't felt in years. Giving someone a meal had always been a way to connect, to show care, but she hadn't expected it to feel like stepping onto a stage in front of a critic whose silence could crush her spirit. Her fingers grazed the plate, straightening the small arrangement of food, adjusting the scraps with meticulous care. She had added a few herbs she had scavenged from a nearby market dumpster, a touch of seasoning she hoped would make a difference. Every action was deliberate, every gesture a plea: see me, acknowledge me, let me matter. Finally, she forced herself to look up. The veteran's eyes met hers. He wasn't smiling, but there was a quiet intensity in his gaze, a recognition that made her stomach tighten, not from fear, but from anticipation. Eat it, she said, her voice quivering. Please, tell me what you think. If it's not good, I'll understand. He leaned forward slightly, picking up a small piece with careful hands. The dragon woman held her breath, the minutes stretching into eternity as he tasted it. His face remained inscrutable for a long moment, and her mind raced. Is it terrible? Have I wasted my courage? Am I worthless? Then he swallowed. Slowly. Deliberately. And finally, he spoke. This is good, he said. Not overly effusive, not falsely kind, but genuine. The words struck her like a spark in the dark. Better than I expected. Her chest loosened. Relief mingled with disbelief. She had expected rejection, ridicule, or indifference. She had not expected honesty, nor appreciation, nor this calm acknowledgement from someone who had clearly seen much worse than her. You really think so? She asked, voice trembling with both hope and doubt. I do, he replied. You've got skill. Not just with food, but with care. Precision. Attention. That counts for something, even here. She looked down at her hands, scarred and stained, suddenly aware that they had not only prepared a meal, but had been witnessed doing so. Witnessed by someone who hadn't walked away. Someone who saw her effort as valuable. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city's distant lights flickered, the cold night pressing in, but in that tiny alley, a fragile bridge had been built. She had offered what she could, and he had received it with respect. That simple act, so ordinary in some worlds, felt monumental here, against the backdrop of her despair. Thank you, she finally whispered. I haven't had anyone care about my cooking, for a long time. He nodded, not looking away. Then maybe it's time someone did. The words carried weight she hadn't realized she had been longing for. Not pity. Not charity. Not sympathy. Recognition. Respect. The understanding that what she had to offer, though small in a world that valued wealth and power, still mattered. A flicker of warmth rose in her chest, fragile but persistent. Perhaps this was the first step toward something more than survival, more than shadows and scraps. Perhaps it was the first time she had been seen for who she truly was. And as the veteran reached for another bite, the dragon woman allowed herself a single, cautious thought. Maybe, just maybe, I'm not as invisible as I believed. The alley was silent except for the faint sizzle of the last bit of food on the cracked barrel. The dragon woman watched the veteran as he chewed, his expression carefully neutral, but she could see the flicker of something behind his eyes. A trace of surprise? Recognition? She couldn't tell. Her heart pounded so loudly that she feared it might betray her thoughts. She had offered her best, her only skill left in a world that had pushed her to the margins. And yet, the way he lingered on her cooking, the way his gaze didn't flinch from her wings, her scales, her ragged clothes, it was unlike anything she had experienced. She had always expected mockery, avoidance, or dismissal. But he was neither laughing nor leaving. He was present. Finally, he set the cardboard plate aside and leaned against the wall, his broad shoulders relaxing slightly. You've got talent, he said, voice low and steady. Real talent. Not just decent scraps thrown together. This is thoughtful. Intentional. She blinked, unsure how to respond. Compliments were not unfamiliar, but this felt different. It carried weight, authority. It wasn't meant to soothe her pride or make her feel better. It was a statement, a recognition of her worth, however small it might have seemed to the world. Intentional? She asked, her voice barely audible. I have to survive. I don't think of it like that. That's exactly why it matters, he said, tilting his head, eyes meeting hers directly for the first time. Because it comes from need, yes, but also care. You put yourself into it. And that shows something most people have long forgotten how to do. Her stomach twisted. He was seeing her, not just the dragon woman scrounging scraps, but her. Every scar, every torn scale, every trembling wing mattered because they told her story, her struggles, her resilience. And he acknowledged it. You think I'm worth something? She asked, her voice a whisper, a fragile tremor hiding hope behind fear. After everything? The veteran didn't flinch. He didn't pause to consider if she should be. He simply said, yes. Her heart nearly stopped. 2 simple syllables, but they reverberated through her like a shockwave. Worth something. The streets had taught her that she was invisible, a ghost, someone to ignore or chase away. She had carried that belief like a heavy cloak, layered over her pride, over her skills, over the simple fact that she had once mattered. And now, here he was, a stranger hardened by war and life, telling her otherwise. I don't know what to say, she admitted, swallowing hard. Her wings twitched, not in fear, but in nervous energy. No one has ever said that to me before. Not honestly. That's the problem, he replied, his voice firm but not harsh. Too many people measure worth by what's convenient, what's loud, what's flashy. They forget the quiet ones. The ones who keep their dignity, even when the world tells them to throw it away. You haven't thrown it away. And that is rare. Her claws clenched slightly, not from anger, but from disbelief. He was right. She hadn't given up entirely, hadn't allowed herself to be swallowed by despair, hadn't abandoned the only skill that was truly hers. She had persisted, quietly, alone, and he saw it. You, she said slowly, you actually see me? I do, he said, his tone unwavering. Not just your food, not just your presence, you. All of it. And if someone like me can see it, then maybe it's time the world starts noticing too. Her chest tightened, a mixture of relief and shock pressing down on her. She had never allowed herself to hope, not really. But now, hope flickered, delicate and tentative, like the first ember of a fire in a dark cave. The veteran pushed himself off the wall, but didn't step away. Keep cooking, he said simply. Keep showing the world what you can do, even if it's just one meal at a time. It's more than survival, it's proof you exist, and that matters. Her wings shivered, not from cold, but from emotion. Proof she existed. The words wrapped around her heart, fragile yet powerful. 4 years, she had wandered the streets, believing herself invisible, worthless, unremarkable. Now, she felt seen. Truly seen. She nodded slowly, letting the heat from the stove and the warmth of his recognition seep into her. I will, she whispered. And in that quiet alley, under the flickering neon lights and the indifferent gaze of the city, something had shifted. A spark had been lit, not just in her heart, but in her purpose. For the first time in a long time, the dragon woman dared to imagine a future where she mattered. And the veteran, standing silently beside her, had given her that chance. The alley had grown colder as the night deepened, yet a small warmth lingered in its shadows, a warmth born not from the meager fire of her barrel stove, but from something far rarer, recognition. The dragon woman stood silently, wings slightly relaxed, as she watched the veteran settle back against the wall. He didn't speak immediately, he simply let her presence fill the space between them. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe without the crushing weight of invisibility pressing down on her. The city's neon lights flickered above, painting her scales in uneven shades of bronze and green, highlighting the scars and imperfections that had once made her feel monstrous. And yet, now, even those marks felt like proof that she had survived, endured, and continued to exist despite everything the world had thrown at her. I didn't expect anyone to care, she murmured, her voice soft, almost lost in the distant hum of traffic. Not about me. Not about what I can do. The veteran's gaze softened, though it remained steady. Most people don't, he said simply. They ignore things that don't fit their rules, things that don't seem important. But that doesn't mean they aren't. And that doesn't mean you're not. She tilted her head, considering his words. Recognition. Respect. Even a small validation had been enough to crack open the door to hope, a door she hadn't dared to approach in a long time. Cooking had been her only lifeline, her only proof that she still had value, but until tonight, that proof had been meaningless. Now, it mattered. The veteran pushed himself to his feet, towering over her in a way that should have felt intimidating, but didn't. He carried the kind of quiet authority that comes from a lifetime of facing danger and surviving. And yet, there was no judgment in his posture, no arrogance, only a steady presence that made her feel, for the first time in a long time, that she wasn't completely alone. "You have skill," he said again, almost as if affirming it to himself as much as to her. "And you've got courage, courage most people don't even realize exists. Don't waste it hiding." Her wings twitched involuntarily. Courage, skill, worth. Words she had almost forgotten existed, buried beneath years of neglect and dismissal. And yet, here they were, offered freely by someone who had no reason to be kind, no reason to care. I'll try," she whispered, unsure if her voice carried hope or fear, or a fragile mixture of both. "I've been trying for so long, to survive, to keep going. Maybe I can do more than just survive." The veteran nodded. "Start small. One meal, one step at a time. That's all it takes. And if someone like me notices, who knows who else will." For a long moment, they stood in silence. The alley was still grim, the shadows long and unforgiving, but inside her, a small fire burned brighter than the tiny stove before her. She realized that survival wasn't the only measure of worth. Existence alone wasn't enough, she had to show the world, in whatever small ways she could, that she mattered. The dragon woman bent over the stove once more, gathering the remnants of her ingredients. This time, her movements carried a new confidence. She was no longer cooking merely to survive, she was cooking to be seen, to prove that her hands, scarred and strong, could create something meaningful, even in the harshest conditions. The veteran watched quietly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He had seen many broken people in his life, people hardened by loss and struggle, yet there was something about her that was different. She hadn't given up entirely. She had clung to a single piece of herself, a skill, a passion, and had preserved it even when the world told her it didn't matter. "And, maybe," he said after a pause, voice low but steady, "this is only the beginning." She looked up at him, eyes wide, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, possibility. Perhaps the streets weren't a prison after all. Perhaps her skills, her courage, her very existence, could carve a place for her in this indifferent city. Perhaps, with the right person beside her, or at least watching, she could finally begin to matter. As the night deepened and the city hummed on around them, the dragon woman realized that for the first time in her life, she felt a spark of hope. A fragile, trembling ember, but enough to ignite a journey she had never imagined. And somewhere in the silence of the alley, between smoke, shadows, and flickering neon, the veteran's presence reminded her that she wasn't invisible, she was seen. And being seen, she realized, was the first step toward being more than just a survivor. The journey ahead was uncertain, dangerous, and uncharted, but for the first time, she was ready to take it.